Morning shift began without ceremony. The hospital did not wake. It resumed. Lights were already on. Floors already polished. Machines already breathing for people who could not. The building functioned the way it always did, precise, layered, hierarchical. Order lived here, and everyone knew their place inside it. The surgeons arrived last. Not by policy. By gravity. White coats moved like flags through corridors. Conversations lowered when they passed. Schedules bent around their preferences. Even the elevators seemed to wait a fraction longer when one of them approached. At 7:12, a woman stepped through the staff entrance wearing navy scrubs and a temporary badge clipped too low on her chest. Travel nurse, Hart. No first name. No department color band. No accumulated pins or stitched initials. The badge marked her as transient before she spoke. She did not look around like new hires usually did. No searching. No hesitation. She walked at a neutral pace, neither fast nor slow, as if she had already chosen a route before entering. Her eyes moved, though. Left hallway, exits, camera dome, fire panel. Right hallway, supply closet, crash cart, oxygen ports. Ceiling, sprinkler spacing, vent placement. She did not stare. She registered. At the nurse's station, a clipboard slid toward her without greeting. Sign. Orientation later. The clerk did not look up. Hart signed. Her handwriting was small, controlled, evenly spaced. Not rushed. Not decorative. Each letter formed the same way, as if repetition mattered. A pair of surgical residents brushed past her shoulder without apology. One of them glanced at her badge. Travel. The word carried no hostility. Only classification. Temporary. Replaceable. Peripheral. Hart stepped aside to give them room, though she had been standing still first. From down the corridor, voices approached, louder, layered, confident. 3 attending surgeons rounding together. Their tone filled space the way equipment hum filled silence. If radiology delays again, I'll pull the scan myself. You won't. I will. You won't. They stopped near the station. One of them finally noticed her. Not her face. Her badge. New? Yes. Her voice was calm, level, unforced. Float? Yes. A pause. The surgeon nodded once, already finished with the interaction. His attention returned to the others before she could add anything else. Make sure she doesn't get assigned or prep, he said to no one in particular. We don't have time for orientation errors. It was not said cruelly. It was said efficiently. Another surgeon flipped through a chart. Agency sends whoever's available. A third added, as long as she stays out of the way. Hart inclined her head once. Not submissive. Acknowledging. She did not respond. They had already forgotten her. A stretcher rolled past. Hart stepped aside before it reached her, positioning herself against the wall where equipment rails would not catch her sleeve. She let the transport team pass without slowing them. She watched the wheels. One rotated slightly off-axis. Not enough to stop movement. Enough to drift left on long stretches. She memorized it. Not because she needed to. Because she did not allow herself not to. At the supply alcove, she opened a cabinet, scanned contents, then closed it without touching anything. Gauze placement. Saline levels. Seal integrity on sterile packs. She moved on. A nurse beside her whispered to another, not quietly enough. She's cataloging. Anxious type. Travelers always are first day. Hart continued walking. She reached the intersection near Surgical Wing B and stopped. Not abruptly. Precisely. People flowed around her, residents, interns, environmental staff, a pharmacist pushing a locked cart. She stood still long enough to watch traffic patterns form and repeat. Who yielded? Who didn't? Who scanned corners before turning? Who walked while reading? 30 seconds. That was all she needed. She resumed moving. Behind her, laughter. One of the surgeons again. She hasn't asked a single question. Give it time. No, he said. Quiet ones either quit or cause problems. Another replied, or they just do the job. The first shrugged. We'll see. They did not lower their voices. They did not think they needed to. At 7:26, Hart entered the secondary corridor leading toward post-op recovery. She slowed slightly. Not from uncertainty. From calculation. There were 3 exits in this wing. One required badge access. One required a keypad. One opened freely but triggered an alarm if held longer than 7 seconds. She glanced once at each door as she passed. Counting steps between them. Measuring distance without appearing to. A monitor alarm chirped somewhere ahead. A sharp, repeating tone. Not critical. But trending. No one reacted yet. Hart's head tilted a fraction, listening to the rhythm. Timing the interval between pulses. Behind her, the surgeons' voices faded into another discussion about schedules, consults, authority. They did not notice she had already mapped half their floor. They did not notice she had memorized their exits. They did not notice she had identified which corridor would bottleneck first if people started running. At 7:29, she reached the recovery desk. The charge nurse handed her a folded sheet. Assignments. Your overflow coverage. Hart looked once. Nodded. No questions. The charge nurse studied her a moment longer than the others had. Not suspicious. Curious. You always this quiet? Yes. Why? Hart met her eyes. Listening shows more. The charge nurse considered that. Then shrugged. Fine. Bed 4 may need monitoring. Hart turned toward the bay. Behind her, far down the corridor, something metallic clattered to the floor. Not loud. But wrong. Hart stopped. Not startled. Still. Her eyes shifted slightly toward the sound. Her breathing did not change. Around her, no one else paused. Not yet. Somewhere in the building, something had just moved out of place. And she was the only one who noticed. The sound did not repeat. That was what made it matter. Most hospital noise came in patterns, alarms cycling, carts rattling, shoes against tile, voices rising and falling. Repetition meant function. Rhythm meant purpose. Silence after metal striking tile meant interruption. Hart stood beside bed 4, eyes on the patient monitor, posture relaxed. Anyone watching would have seen a travel nurse checking vitals. She was listening down the corridor. No footsteps running. No call for assistance. No irritated voice demanding to know what fell. The absence of reaction settled into her thoughts more firmly than the sound itself. She adjusted the 4 lines slightly, a real correction, not theater, and let her gaze drift toward the doorway. A supply technician pushed a cart past. Routine pace. Neutral expression. Not him. She stepped into the hall. Not quickly. Not slowly. Exactly as a nurse would who had finished one task and was moving to the next. The metal tray lay near the junction corner 20 feet away. Upside down. No instruments scattered. No packaging. Just the tray. Hart approached and crouched, right knee lowering first so her body did not block peripheral view. She picked it up and set it quietly on a nearby counter. Her fingers brushed the tile once. Cool. Recently disturbed air moved differently across surfaces. The temperature change was slight, but it told her the tray had not been lying there long. She straightened. Lose something? A passing orderly nodded toward the tray. No, Hart said. Her tone made it sound like agreement, not correction. The orderly continued on. She looked at the wall above where the tray had fallen. A security camera dome. Its black lens should have been angled toward the medication cart parking zone. It was not. It pointed 6 degrees too far left. Most people would not see that. Hart did not stare at it. She simply stood where she could see both corridor directions reflected faintly in the plastic curve. Footsteps approached behind her, measured, confident. Problem? One of the surgeons. She stepped aside to clear his path. No. He glanced once at the tray now resting neatly on the counter. Then don't linger in the hallway. Yes, doctor. He continued walking without slowing. Hart watched his reflection disappear from the camera dome. Then she moved on. At the visitor seating alcove near the elevators, 2 men sat apart from each other. Not together. That was the first detail. People who arrived together usually sat together unless they wanted distance. These men wanted distance. Boots instead of shoes. Dark jackets despite indoor heat. Hands resting on thighs instead of on phones. Their posture held tension not from anxiety, from readiness. Hart passed them as if she had not noticed either one. In the brushed metal elevator doors, she saw their reflections watching opposite directions. Not patients' relatives. Not contractors. Not hospital. She pressed the call button. One of the men spoke without looking at her. Staff-only elevator? His voice was neutral. Polite. Testing. Yes. The door opened. She stepped inside. The men did not move to follow. The doors closed. Inside the elevator, Hart's eyes lifted to the inspection certificate frame. Issued last month. No scratches on screws. Panel recently opened. Recently resealed. She filed it away. The elevator opened on surgical records. She stepped out, walked directly to the file counter, and handed over a chart number from memory. The clerk typed without interest. Retrieved a folder. Passed it across. Hart opened it. Her eyes moved once down the page. Stopped. A name. No reaction showed on her face. But her thumb pressed slightly harder against the paper edge. She closed the file. Thank you. She returned it. Didn't need it, the clerk asked. I remembered what I came for. She turned and walked back toward the elevator. Behind the counter, the clerk frowned faintly, unsure why that felt unusual. Back on the recovery floor, the rhythm had not changed. Machines hummed. Staff moved. Voices overlapped. Normal. Too normal. Hart resumed her place beside bed 4. The patient's pulse oximeter cable had been rerouted. Not incorrectly. Just differently than before. She looked at the floor. Wheel marks overlapped in a pattern that had not been there 10 minutes earlier. Someone had repositioned equipment. Quietly. Without logging it. Her gaze lifted toward the corridor intersection. The camera dome still pointed 6 degrees off. At the nurse's station, 2 residents whispered. Security transfer coming through later. What kind? Private detail, I think. Hart did not look at them. She adjusted the patient's blanket. Her voice, when she spoke, was mild. Which entrance? They glanced at her, surprised she had spoken at all. Loading bay, probably, one said. Why? She smoothed the blanket edge. No reason. They shrugged and returned to their conversation. Hart checked the monitor again. Steady numbers. Stable patient. Unstable environment. She rested her hand lightly on the bed rail. Waiting. Because something had already started. The hospital just had not realized it yet. At 8:02, the air changed. Not temperature. Not sound. Pressure. Hospitals had a rhythm built from motion and interruption. Stretchers arrived. Elevators opened. Phones rang. But every movement belonged to a system. Even urgency had a pattern. This did not. Hart felt it before she saw it, a subtle tightening in the corridor currents, like a building holding its breath. Down the hall, double doors opened. A stretcher came through fast but controlled, pushed by two men in dark suits. Not security uniforms. Not medical transport. Their hands stayed near the rails, not gripping them. Ready, not straining. For more followed. Spacing exact. Eyes moving, not wandering. Escort formation. Military. The patient on the stretcher was conscious but motionless, oxygen cannula in place, wrists resting at his sides without restraints. A blanket covered him to the chest. No visible injury. No panic. His gaze tracked ceiling tiles as he passed. Not drugged. Deliberately still. Behind them, a hospital administrator hurried to keep pace, speaking too quickly. We were told this was routine intake. One of the suited men raised two fingers without looking at him. The administrator stopped speaking immediately. Not intimidated. Conditioned. Hart stepped back into the patient bay doorway as the formation approached. She lowered her eyes slightly, not submissive, simply reducing profile. The lead escort's gaze swept past her. Paused. Not on her face. On her hands. Still. Empty. Unshaking. His eyes moved on. They passed. No one else on the floor noticed the geometry of it, the spacing between bodies, the sightlines they preserved, the angles they never crossed. To the staff, it looked like a private security team escorting an important patient. To Hart, it looked like a mobile perimeter. At the nurse's station, irritation rose immediately. What is this? One surgeon asked, stepping into the corridor. We weren't informed of a priority transfer. The administrator caught up, breath uneven. Special clearance case. This is a surgical floor. Yes. Then we need medical classification. I don't have it. The surgeon's jaw tightened. You don't bring unknown variables onto my floor. Behind him, another muttered, agency chaos. Hart adjusted the four-pump in her bay without looking toward them. Listening. Footsteps. Fabric shift. Radio static clipped short. The escort team halted outside room 12. One man checked the ceiling corners. Another glanced once down the adjacent hallway. The third opened the door. The stretcher rolled inside. Two remained outside. Stationary. Watching. Not guards. Sensors. Hart stepped into the corridor carrying a clipboard. She walked toward the linen cart parked near the intersection. Stopped beside it. Shifted it 3 inches to the right. The wheel lock clicked softly. A nurse passing behind her frowned. That was fine where it was. It blocks the outlet. The nurse looked. It did not. She shrugged and continued walking. Hart's gaze lifted briefly. From the cart's new position, the reflection in its chrome handle now showed the blind angle behind the corner. She moved on. Room 12's door stayed closed. No staff entered. No staff exited. The two escorts outside stood with identical posture, feet shoulder-width apart, hands resting loosely in front. Anyone glancing would see patience. Hart saw readiness held in suspension. One of them turned his head a fraction as she passed. Not tracking her. Checking the corridor behind her. Good discipline. She continued walking. At the central desk, the earlier surgeon spoke again, voice low but edged. If this interferes with scheduled procedures. It won't, said the administrator. You can't guarantee that. A pause. No, the administrator admitted. The surgeon exhaled through his nose. Unacceptable. Hart set down a stack of chart labels beside the keyboard. The clerk nodded thanks without looking up. Hart's eyes drifted toward the wall monitor showing internal camera feeds. One square displayed the lobby. Two men sat in the waiting area chairs. Boots. Dark jackets. Distance between them. Still there. Still not using phones. Still watching opposite directions. She memorized their positions relative to the entrance. Then she looked away. A resident approached her hesitantly. You're covering overflow, right? Yes. We may need vitals logged for the new arrival if they clear it. Hart nodded. He shifted his weight. We don't have clearance yet. So just, stay available. Yes. He lingered half a second, as if expecting a question. She did not ask one. He left. Down the corridor, the door to room 12 opened briefly. One escort stepped out, spoke quietly into his sleeve, then returned inside. The door closed again. Hart counted the seconds between open and shut. 4. Not casual. Timed. Behind her, laughter again, one of the surgeons. Private detail. Must be important. Another replied, important people go to private facilities. Not when they need anonymity. Or protection. They shared a look. Speculation entertained them. Hart adjusted the cuff on her wrist, covering the faint edge of a scar barely visible beneath her sleeve. Her eyes lifted once more to the hallway. The linen cart. The camera dome. The closed door. All points connected in her mind like lines on a map no one else could see. At 8:11, an elevator opened at the far end. No one stepped out. It remained open 3 seconds. Closed. Hart watched the indicator light above it. No floor request registered. Someone had called it. Then cancelled. Test movement. Not random. She turned back toward her assigned bay. Her pace did not change. Her expression did not change. But a decision had already formed. Something had entered the hospital under protection. Something else had entered without it. And they were moving toward each other. Across the corridor, the two escorts outside room 12 subtly shifted their stance at the same time. Not visible unless you knew what to look for. Hart noticed. Because she had been waiting for that. The hospital continued breathing. Machines humming. Staff walking. Surgeons complaining. Routine holding. For now. Hart moved through the recovery wing as if she belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. Her tasks were ordinary, procedural, easily ignored. Yet every motion carried intention. A supply cart blocked a hallway near the surgical elevators. Not completely, but enough to create a minor obstruction. A resident muttered, "Move that," and reached toward it. Hart stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said softly, pressing her palm against the cart's edge. It did not slide. Not forcefully. Not aggressively. Just shifted slightly, pivoting to a better alignment. The wheels clicked into position. The resident stared. "Why?" "Clears the corner," Hart said calmly. Her tone left no room for argument, yet carried none of the arrogant surgeons expected. She did not add, "I already measured every approach angle." She simply stepped back. He hesitated. Then moved past. Hart's eyes flicked toward the closed double doors leading to room 12. She did not look at the patient or the escorts. Just the angles. Lines. Traffic flow. The head surgeon arrived from the opposite corridor, clipboard in hand, exasperated. "Travel nurse. Why is that cart moved? I specifically." Hart tilted her head slightly, careful not to meet his eyes directly. It was blocking equipment access. He took a step forward, voice rising. "I do not need a." She stepped aside. Not submissive. Not confrontational. Calculated. The moment stretched. His words hung in the air, unfinished. Behind him, a gurney turned the corner too quickly. Wheels caught on the hallway seam. Noise clattered. Equipment rattled. A spill kit teetered. Hart reacted instantly. She reached out and stabilized the gurney's frame before it tipped. The resident who had questioned her cart placement froze. The surgeon's jaw tightened. No one else moved fast enough. Silence followed. "Fine," the head surgeon muttered, stepping back, concealing surprise. Hart returned the cart to the optimal angle. Not a word. No acknowledgement. She merely repositioned her weight as if the corridor belonged to her only for that brief instant. Down the hall, the staff noticed small discrepancies. Supplies not in the same bins. Crash carts slightly shifted. Nothing dramatic. But patterns formed. Hart noticed every shift she had not made herself. Someone was testing reactions. Timing doors. Watching corridors. Learning the building. She went to the wall panel to check the automated door locks, pressing them without speaking. She timed each opening. 7 seconds. 9. 7. Patterns confirmed. She did not flinch. The two escorts outside room 12 mirrored movements inside, though they were unaware she was watching. Not random. Not protocol. Testing. Hart's hand hovered over the floor intercom, a silent readiness. Not because she intended to use it, but because she measured consequences in seconds. In the next bay, a patient monitor alarm chimed quietly. No one reacted. Hart approached, adjusted the electrode lead, confirmed the readings, and left without comment. Behind her, a resident whispered, "She's precise." Another responded, like she's anticipating something. Hart did not look. She moved toward the corner again, slightly crouched to avoid obstructing sight lines. Her eyes scanned hallways, intersections, angles of approach. Small adjustments. No one noticed. Yet they mattered. A janitor rounded a corner pushing a mop bucket. He nearly collided with a gurney in the hallway. Hart placed a hand briefly on the cart, guiding it a fraction to prevent contact. Again, subtle. Silent. Invisible. No one saw her work. Only the avoided collisions, the prevented delays. The head surgeon finally stepped aside near the supply closet, muttering under his breath about interfering staff. Hart paused. Not out of uncertainty, but measurement. She allowed him a few steps ahead, observing. His walking pace created a blind spot behind the corner where an unnoticed individual attempted to slip through the service hallway. Hart noted it. Mentally catalogued it. Did not act. Not yet. Instead, she walked back to her station as though she had merely completed routine duties. Hands rested lightly on the counter. Breath calm. Eyes steady. Everyone assumed she had done nothing remarkable. Except Hart knew she had already prevented the first breach. The threat had tested them. She had already won the first exchange. And they remained blind to it. The two escorts outside room 12 shifted stance again, almost imperceptibly, mirroring the tension building inside the hospital. Hart did not flinch. She had already calculated response angles, evacuation corridors, and choke points. The building might not yet realize the danger. But she did. And she was ready. By mid-morning, the rhythm of the hospital had changed, though no one else could sense it. Hart moved through the corridors like a shadow that belonged to no one but the building itself. Every patient, every cart, every nurse, every visitor, every door, each detail layered into a network of motion she had already mapped. Not memorized as a chart, but felt as a pattern, alive and shifting. At the nurse's station, a resident glanced at her again. "You've been everywhere already. You've watched." Hart's eyes did not lift. She continued logging vitals, pressing buttons, moving charts. Her movements were deliberate but understated. "Yes," she said softly. No pride. No declaration. Just confirmation. Down the hall, the first visitor cluster approached, 3 people together, speaking softly but gesturing frequently. Hart's gaze lifted fractionally, noting spacing, positions, and body orientation. 2 men in the lobby, boots and dark jackets, remained in place. Their eyes followed opposite directions, scanning hallways rather than the elevators. Hart calculated their sweep patterns, projected their lines of sight, and estimated their reaction times. No one else noticed them. A delivery cart appeared from the service corridor. Wheels squeaked. Hart tilted her head, noting that its load slightly obscured the blind corner near surgical wing B. She adjusted her step, placing herself at an angle to see both the cart's approach and the open hallway intersection. A slight brush of her sleeve against the counter went unnoticed. Yet she had created a vantage point that no one else would consider. Through this position, she could see the patient escort team outside room 12. One man shifted subtly, a small change in stance, a micro-adjustment in weight distribution. Hart catalogued it. Not reacting. Not drawing attention. She knew the shift indicated that their probe had begun. Her first real test came minutes later. An unfamiliar staff member hurried down the corridor, carrying a tray of instruments to room 14. He hesitated near the corner outside room 12, unsure if he should enter. Hart stepped lightly to the edge of his line of sight. "Elevator side for that delivery," she said softly, voice casual. Not commanding. Not sharp. Advisory only. The staffer nodded and rerouted. Small, almost invisible. Yet it prevented a potential bottleneck where the 2 outside escorts could have been compromised. Hart returned to her bay. Fingers brushing a monitor cable, adjusting it, watching traffic. Every misstep corrected before it occurred. Every anomaly catalogued. Near the supply alcove, Hart noticed movement patterns repeating among her colleagues. 2 residents always walked together. A nurse consistently turned her head in one direction before opening a supply cabinet. She recognized these sequences as predictable behavior, almost a human rhythm. She tested a minor change. Step lightly to the left while checking vitals. A door clicked slightly behind her. The residents adjusted their pace unknowingly. Small, controlled influence. Inconspicuous authority. At the corner intersection, she paused to observe the elevators. They opened once without floor selection, someone had called it then cancelled. Test movement. Probe. Hart noted the timing. Estimated the next cycle. Positioned herself along the line of sight to observe. It came as predicted, a hospital staff member emerged, walking faster than usual. A visitor ducked back. The 2 men outside room 12 shifted, matching calculated patterns. Hart did nothing but remain in her post, calm and unassuming. She allowed the pattern to play out, validating her predictions. Everything aligned with her calculations. A resident whispered to another nearby, too softly for her to hear, "I don't know why, but she knows everything." Hart adjusted a blanket. Did not look up. Did not respond. Her awareness extended beyond ordinary observation. Lines, angles, distances, timing, she saw the hospital as a system. Every human motion was a variable. Every change was a signal. And the signals were converging. She exhaled softly, a gesture no one noticed. Because the building, the staff, and even the visitors assumed she was a temporary nurse, an outsider, incapable of affecting outcomes beyond routine tasks. They were wrong. Hart already controlled the flow. She had mapped the danger. She had predicted movements. And she would be ready for whatever came next. The pressure in the air grew, though the monitors hummed steadily and the staff continued with normal duties. The hospital had no awareness of the storm approaching. Hart did. And that knowledge alone gave her an edge. By late morning, the subtle tension Hart had been tracking became tangible. A sudden commotion erupted in the waiting area. Chairs scraped against tile. A visitor shouted. 2 staff members rushed to intervene. Machines beeped, alarms chiming softly but insistently. To anyone else, it appeared chaotic. Hart did not move quickly. She moved deliberately. She had already predicted where the crowd would form. Where panic would cluster. Where equipment might be displaced. Every step she took reinforced calculated order rather than adding noise. The first patient reacted, clinging to a nearby chair. Hart stepped between them and the gurney in the hallway. She did not speak loudly. She did not shout instructions. She positioned herself so her body guided movement without touching anyone. People adjusted instinctively. Not because they recognized authority. Because her placement left only one safe option. The visitor who had shouted was now backed against a wall, gesturing wildly. Hart's hand rested lightly on the chair between them, preventing a sudden tip. Not force. Not confrontation. Subtle influence, unnoticed by anyone else. A resident approached, unsure, hands half raised. Hart intercepted with a gentle pivot. The resident froze, confusion etched on their face. Hart tilted her head slightly, gesturing with her eyes toward the exit corridor. The resident moved as intended. All under her control. Down the hall, the door to room 12 clicked open for a moment. One of the escort stepped out, assessing the situation. No threat had yet crossed their line, but testing had begun. Hart's gaze swept the floor. Not just the disturbance. Not just the crowd. Equipment carts, stretchers, and wheelchairs, each potential hazard, were monitored as if she could control the outcome before it happened. A spill kit teetered on a cart. She nudged it subtly with her foot, just enough to stabilize. No one noticed. A nurse cried out as a tray tipped. Hart's hand was already near, catching it before it fell, preventing injury and noise. "Thank you," the nurse whispered. Hart nodded faintly, expression neutral. No pride. No acknowledgement beyond necessity. The crowd began moving toward the elevator. Hart positioned herself in the choke point. Not to block. Not to command. To guide. A resident attempted to bypass her. She shifted subtly. Their path redirected without a word. The flow remained steady, controlled, contained. Through the corridor's mirrored glass, Hart noted reflection of the lobby. The 2 men in dark jackets had shifted stance, moving closer to cover the line of sight she had already observed. A test within a test. Hart counted steps, calculated angles, adjusted her positioning. Her eyes never left the chaos. The commotion lasted 3 minutes. 3 minutes in which the hospital teetered on a potential cascade of disruption. 3 minutes in which Hart did not act violently, did not speak loudly, did not draw attention. And yet, she prevented what could have been catastrophic. The elevators opened. People streamed in an orderly manner. Equipment remained upright. No injuries. No alarms escalated. All under her control, though no one knew. Afterward, the head surgeon emerged from the corner, flustered. That was fine?" he asked, voice tight with barely concealed astonishment. Hart glanced briefly at him. A subtle, measured nod. "Fine," she said softly. No explanation. No credit. The surgeon left, muttering to himself, uncomprehending. Alone in the hallway, Hart exhaled quietly. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Observation. Calculation. Awareness. Because the disturbance was only a probe. Somewhere else, movement was beginning. And she sensed it already. The real test was approaching. She adjusted her gloves. Straightened her posture. Calm. Focused. Ready. The hospital had been tested. She had passed. But the game was just starting. By early afternoon, the subtle victories Hart had orchestrated began to demand a price. The hospital continued its routine on the surface. Machines hummed. Monitors blinked. Staff moved between bays and corridors. The chaos from earlier had subsided. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, she felt the weight of every action she had taken. Not because anyone noticed. No one had. Because restraint carried its own cost. At the nurse's station, a young resident whispered to a colleague. I don't know. Too precise. Maybe she's not supposed to be here. Hart did not react. She adjusted the pulse oximeter on a patient in bed 4, smoothing the blanket, calibrating the 4-drip rate. Every small movement was necessary, deliberate. She could have spoken. Taken credit. Corrected every doubt. Claimed authority where others assumed ignorance. But to do so would compromise something larger. A chain of operations no one in the hospital, not surgeons, not administrators, not security, could understand. Silence, she knew, was protection. A call came through the intercom, floater coverage requested in Recovery Bay 3. Hart moved, precise as always. A tray needed adjustment, a monitor slight recalibration. She did it quickly, methodically. A resident asked, "How do you know exactly what to do?" Hart's eyes flicked briefly toward him. Calm. Measured. Observation, she said. He nodded, unsure, and walked away. Later, she faced her first moral choice. A supply closet door had been left ajar by a hurried staff member. Inside, several small items critical to patient care were exposed. Someone could remove or damage them accidentally. She could alert administration. She could call for the staff member. Draw attention. Claim credit for noticing the oversight. Or she could fix it quietly. She chose the latter. No one saw her rearrange the items. No one praised her. No one knew. The cost was subtle, she absorbed the responsibility silently. Any procedural violation traced back to her would go unnoticed. Her actions were invisible. In the hallway near room 12, the two escorts shifted stance again. Their test movements continued. Hart noticed immediately. She adjusted her position in the corridor, blocking a potential breach. Not forcefully. Not visibly. Just precise placement. Seconds later, a security officer stepped through the opposite entrance, unaware that she had already stabilized the situation. He would receive recognition for her work. And she accepted it. Back at bed 4, Hart sat briefly on the edge of the mattress. Hands folded. Head slightly bowed. Not exhaustion, contemplation. Every step she had taken, every adjustment, every quiet command carried weight. Every intervention protected lives. And every recognition went elsewhere. But she did not hesitate. She had made a choice long ago. The mission mattered more than credit. A monitor beeped softly beside her. She adjusted it. No one thanked her. No one noticed. And that was acceptable. Because in her world, restraint, subtlety, and discipline were the only measures of true authority. She exhaled quietly. The hospital continued to operate. Machines hummed. Staff moved. And the threat lurking in the periphery had not yet revealed itself. Hart remained calm. Observant. Silent. Ready. The cost was hers alone. And she paid it willingly. By mid-afternoon, the threat Hart had been tracking fully revealed itself. A figure approached the medical access corridor. Subtle movements, measured pace, the weight of someone trained to test without immediately attacking. Not ordinary staff. Not visitor. Hart recognized it instantly. Her body did not stiffen. She did not reach for a weapon. She moved deliberately, positioning herself along the corridor line of sight. Calm. Calculated. The intruder paused briefly, scanning the floor. They did not see her. They assumed the corridor was empty. She allowed them the illusion. Behind her, room 12 remained occupied by the guarded patient. The two escorts outside mirrored each other's stance, a silent perimeter. They had not detected Hart either. She exhaled softly. Time to act. Not with force. Not with noise. But with precision. Every movement, every step, every adjustment she made to her surroundings had prepared for this exact moment. She subtly shifted a cart along the wall to create a controlled funnel. A linen rack pivoted slightly to block a blind angle. The intruder moved forward. Hart calculated their line of approach, anticipating shifts in posture, weight, and timing. She did not step forward. She did not call attention. Yet, as they reached the funnel, she subtly guided them with placement, blocking escape without confrontation. One small adjustment, almost imperceptible. The intruder paused. Something was wrong. Lines of sight were blocked unexpectedly. Movements constrained without visible cause. Hart's eyes met theirs briefly, a controlled glance. No recognition. No emotion. Just observation. The intruder's pause lasted less than a second. But in that moment, she had already gained the advantage. Seconds later, military personnel arrived through the secondary access door. Not to intervene, they did not need to. The intruder was contained. Movement halted. Calculated. Controlled. Hart stepped aside, allowing the colonel to pass along the corridor. He did not slow. Did not glance at her directly. Yet, in passing, he acknowledged her. A brief, formal nod. No words. No ceremony. But enough. The surgeons heard it, half a step behind. Eyes widened, confusion registering. Recognition unspoken. Hart remained neutral. Calm. Unmoved. She had done what was necessary. The colonel had recognized her authority, quietly, formally, and without fanfare. The intruder was escorted away. No one else saw the precision, the anticipation, the calculated restraint Hart had exercised. The hospital returned to rhythm. Machines hummed. Staff resumed their routines. The patient remained stable. No one noticed her subtle control of the situation, except the colonel, whose acknowledgement carried weight only she understood. Hart walked back toward her assigned bay. Each step measured. Calm. Silent. Her badge remained clipped low, temporary, unremarkable. No one suspected her true identity. No one noticed the quiet authority that had stabilized the crisis. She had corrected the course of events without a single dramatic gesture, without a shout, without visible heroics. The price she had paid earlier, the unseen labor, the absorption of responsibility, was vindicated in the moment of quiet recognition. And yet, she would not claim it. The surgeons whispered among themselves, confused and awed. But Hart never acknowledged them. Never sought approval. Never allowed herself the satisfaction of being seen. She simply returned to her station. And waited. Because in her world, true authority was exercised quietly, deliberately, and without recognition. The hospital hummed. Machines. Footsteps. Conversation. Routine. All appeared normal. But the order Hart had imposed, the threat contained, the lines drawn and respected, none of that would be documented. Only she knew what had transpired. And that was enough. The shift ended without fanfare. Machines hummed in steady rhythm. Monitors blinked. Staff filed out in predictable patterns. Surgeons checked schedules, exchanged clipped words, and left for the next case. Hart signed out at the desk. Her temporary badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Nothing marked her apart from her presence. Nothing recorded her interventions, her anticipation, her authority. The colonel had left minutes earlier, no announcement, no report. Recognition had been given, but silently, formally, and only to those trained to notice. A security officer watched her from the end of the corridor. Not in curiosity. Not in suspicion. Awareness. Understanding. Hart returned the badge. Hands folded, posture neutral. She glanced briefly at the nurse's station. No one met her eyes. No one spoke. She had been a ghost all day. The lobby doors opened. She stepped outside. The sunlight struck her scrubs. She walked without haste. Without looking back. The hospital continued its rhythm behind her. Machines hummed. Staff moved. Life persisted. No one knew the storm she had contained. No one understood the quiet authority that had corrected it. Only one person had noticed. And they did not speak of it. Hart walked into the city streets. Calm. Reserved. Unseen. Her work complete. Her identity intact. No applause. No acknowledgement. No spectacle. Only discipline. Only precision. Only quiet strength. The hospital returned to routine. And she disappeared into it.